Hello, everyone. Today's commentary is a sequel, if you will, to one that we published recently entitled The United States of America. It's called Ruthless. Is Justin Trudeau causing America to become our post-nation state? We begin with a quotation from Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War. Quote, "An evil man will burn his own nation to the ground to rule over the ashes." How do we go about committing national suicide? Good question. Here is the step-by-step method evidently being employed by Canadians. First, choose a weak leader for a centrist party. As a child, this person was weaned on left-leaning political ideology and admiration for communist dictators like Fidel Castro and Chairman Mao. His only observable talent or ability is an inbred understanding of how to hold on to power. Next, provide him with a virtually unassailable majority with support from the NDP. Then remain helpless for another 4 years as he implements policies that, number one, kill Canada's GDP. 2, stain our international reputation by failing to act against rising Semitism. Unconscionably glorifying anti-Semitic violence. Financially supporting terror around the world. Honoring a war criminal in Parliament, and refusing to adequately fund our military to protect Canadian sovereignty and fulfill our international obligations to NATO. Third, overwhelm Canada's welfare structure and housing capabilities with rapid rate immigration that is changing the face of our nation. Fourth, further impoverish Canadians with a radical globalist climate change agenda that does nothing to reduce world carbon emissions, but much to kill our national economy. Fifth, fail to balance or pursue a balancing of our country's budget, continuously piling on debt through his agenda, thereby saddling future generations with an unsustainable national debt and a declining credit rating. Sixth, failing to support development of a clean, liquefied natural gas or LNG industry as Canada's best export commodity, with declared willing customers such as Japan, Germany, and others. 7, permitting foreign entities favoring his government, like the CCP, to meddle in our national elections, and minimizing support for Israel while giving billions of taxpayer dollars to the likes of Hamas and Iran. 8, shutting down Parliament, promising to resign, and then pledging another $5 billion of Canadian taxpayer dollars to the corrupt money laundering scheme that is the Ukraine proxy war. Number 9, all but pledging to send Canadian troops into a hot war with Russia, even as the U.S. is withdrawing support for Ukraine and brokering an end to that conflict with Mr. Putin. And finally, instigating, fomenting, and exploiting a catastrophic trade war with the world's largest economy, most important trading partner, and our closest military ally, the United States of America. So given Justin Trudeau's globalist policies, all of which threaten Canada's sovereignty, the question now arises, is it time for Canada to join the United States? For generations, we Canadians have believed in the notion of a unified, indivisible Canada, that no matter what happens, the country will always remain intact. The idea of breaking up or joining another nation has been dismissed as ludicrous. But history proves otherwise. Nations change, borders shift, political realities evolve. The belief that Canada will always remain intact is not based upon facts. It is rather an assumption. So for decades, the world was told that a two-state solution was the only way to resolve the perpetual Gaza conflict. It was the standard belief so deeply ingrained that even questioning it was considered heresy. But after nearly 80 years of failure, President Trump shattered that illusion by proposing something entirely novel. What if the two-state solution never worked because it was never viable in the first place? What if reality demanded a different approach? As Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu puts it, quote, "If the Arabs put down their weapons today, there would be no more violence. If the Jews put down their weapons today, there would be no more Israel," end quote. President Trump is now inviting us to apply the same outside-the-box thinking to Canada. What if a permanently united Canada is just another false assumption, one that no longer reflects reality? What if the country is already so broken, so fundamentally changed, that holding it together is neither possible or beneficial? Canada is clearly no longer the worthy country it once was. Under Trudeau's reign, everything that made Canada strong, free, and independent has been dismantled by policies prioritizing a globalist agenda above domestic issues. Free speech is under constant attack, with government-imposed censorship bills such as Bill C-63 that seek to restrict and penalize harmful online content, including speech deemed Islamophobic by government-regulated human rights commissions, the horrors of which have been witnessed in places like Great Britain and Germany. Border security has collapsed under mass immigration policies that overwhelm social services and contribute to rampant human and drug trafficking, rising crime rates, and the fentanyl crisis, all of which benefit global crime networks at our expense. The Canadian economy is strangled by endless taxation, including carbon taxes, a crumbling healthcare system, small business erosion, and climate mandates. Even as the Trudeau government pushes for a central bank digital currency and more foreign oil dependence in a country sitting on the world's third largest oil and gas reserves. Foreign influence is compromising national security. From China's election interference and growing control over critical industry and infrastructure, including seaports vital to Canada's trade and security, to Trudeau's fealty to the World Economic Forum, which aligns globalist agendas with Canadian policy and domestic legislation. To make matters worse, Trudeau has even pledged to be ruthless on his way out the door. Quote, "I have to admit, my friends, I'm a little bit emotional tonight," Trudeau told the crowd. "One of the things that comes with knowing you're on a countdown clock until your last day means you get to be really ruthless about the things you want to do and don't want to do." So at what point do we recognize that we are committing national suicide and that this is simply no longer Canada? The core identity of the nation has been erased, just as Trudeau told New York Times Magazine shortly after taking office back in October of 2015, quote, "Canada could be the first post-national state. There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada," end quote. Pro-terrorist flags are flying freely throughout Canada. Trudeau took down Canadian flags flying outside his office in Ottawa, preferring instead the grotesque LGBTQ+ flag. Canadians publicly carrying their own national flag are often confronted, ridiculed, or even attacked. There was a noticeable absence of Canadian flags flying in Ottawa recently on the 60th anniversary of the Maple Leaf, since many Canadians fear violent attack for simply displaying it openly. Adding insult to injury, thousands of misguided hockey fans booed the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner at the recent NHL Four Nations Cup, in which Canada defeated the U.S. in a memorable final, ended on a brilliant overtime goal by a player of the era, Connor McDavid. In a predictable display of reverence and class, Boston hockey fans did not boo our national anthem when it was played during the trophy presentation. So, Are we actually expected to believe that joining the U.S. would somehow be the real loss of our national sovereignty? What sort of sovereignty is this? What remains of a nation's identity when we cannot even proudly display our own national flag without fearing backlash? If we refuse to question our assumptions about Canada, then we will be blinded to the inescapable truth that the country we are fighting to save may already be lost. It is therefore time to rethink Canada's future in ways we have never done before. Restoring its greatness requires recognizing that the status quo cannot save us. Many believe that Canada can be rescued if the right leader takes power. CPC leader Pierre Poilievre has gained significant support and positioned himself as the remedy to Trudeau's destruction. He speaks against censorship, promises to axe the hated carbon tax, and opposes many globalist policies. He might be Canada's last hope. And yet he still refuses to revise the equalization system that rapes Alberta. He plans to keep Canada in the Paris Climate Accords that Prime Minister Harper signed, and favors continued mass immigration and government-sponsored housing for them, and pledges support for the globalist proxy war in Ukraine. He even plans to have an LGBTQ activist as his deputy prime minister. Hardly conservative. So is he even a risk worth taking? Even if the CPC win the next federal election, it will inherit a corrupt system that still favors the elites, the media, the courts, the bureaucratic deep state. These institutions will fight to block any real change. Poilievre may talk about tackling these issues, but how much can he actually dismantle? And what is the cost to Canadians if he fails? Even if the CPC succeed in delaying Canada's collapse, what happens when the Liberals regain power? The suicidal cycle will simply repeat itself. The decline will continue. The Canada we once knew will only slip further into the abyss of history. So if this is the foreseeable future, then why assume that Canada is the only option? For generations, Canadians have been told that joining the U.S. would mean losing our core identity. But what is left of Canada's identity after a decade of Justin Trudeau? A country where free speech is criminalized, borders are open, and people are penalized for working hard and succeeding? A nation where foreign interests dictate domestic policy while our own citizens struggle to afford life's basic necessities? Comparatively, U.S. states enjoy more autonomy than do Canadian provinces. They make sovereign decisions on tax rates, budgets, and judicial systems without federal government interference. As potential 51st and 52nd states, Alberta and Saskatchewan, rich in natural resources and frustrated by federal oversight, could, number one, develop their own energy resources without facing federal regulations or policies, including environmental restrictions and carbon taxes, limiting or shutting down certain energy projects like refineries and pipelines. And secondly, they could control their own taxation and regulations rather than having their wealth siphoned by the federal government through equalization payments to provinces with lower revenues. At a time when Canada slips further into globalist, read CCP, control, censorship, and economic decay, the idea of becoming the 51st state may no longer be radical. It may instead be the only path to survival. And yet, some of you will still say, just wait for the next election. But wait for what? For leading Liberal candidate Mark Carney, a WEF insider who will declare a state of emergency over Canada's fake trade war with the U.S. and use that power to accelerate the Liberal Party's globalist agenda? Or a CPC leader who may talk about fixing Canada on the Jordan Peterson podcast, but once elected, refuse to dismantle the corrupt system enabling it? Or PPC leader Maxime Bernier, who takes a much more radical stance against Trudeau, but lacks the political influence to even get elected to Parliament, let alone implement Javier Milei-level reforms? Suddenly, becoming Americans seems like a better alternative than remaining a puppet of the CCP-aligned globalists. Canada and the U.S. would be united under a single political system with shared economic goals and stronger borders, something desperately needed as we face economic instability, rising inflation, weakened national security, and growing foreign influence from our enemies. Canada would no more be treated as a pawn in the globalist game of risk. Our security, prosperity, and national interests would come first, just as Trump has promised to Americans. He has graciously extended the same MAGA vision to Canadians, promising to cut our taxes by more than 60%, double business growth, and offer military protection. Presently, the richest Canadian province, Alberta, is poorer than the poorest of U.S. states. This is due mainly to the fact that for the same hour of work, an American produces $80 of per capita GDP, while his Canadian cousin works just as hard to only produce $50 worth. That is a 40% gap, the highest in recorded history. Trudeau and Carney mean to sell us out to globalist elites and foreign interests, weakening border security and allowing legal crossings to surge. Meanwhile, Trump is securing U.S. borders and protecting America from powerful enemies that seek to undermine, invade, and control it, because he puts his own country and its people first. While Trudeau continues to ruthlessly induce Canada's demise, allowing inflation to soar and job losses to mount, Trump is revitalizing the American economy by ruthlessly cutting bureaucratic waste, eliminating bloated government programs, and halting reckless spending. Trump is working to restore fiscal responsibility to America because he puts his country first. The bad guys in Canada come from the same noxious stew as those in America, and Canadians likewise deplore them. The fentanyl that is killing Americans comes from the same source as that which is killing us, and we deplore that too. At the beginning of this full crisis, Trump refused to even talk to our foolish prime minister. After Trudeau was finally allowed to visit Mar-a-Lago, he came back saying that he had a good talk with Trump and that the Liberals were going to spend $1.4 billion over the next 5 years to hire 10,000 border guards. That may have impressed his base, but we can be certain that none of this will ever be implemented. Trudeau is a globalist, fully committed to the WEF pillar of open borders. If Trudeau were at all sincere, he could have immediately called upon the RCMP and the military to secure the border. Instead, he wrapped himself in the maple leaf and announced that he was going to wage a dollar-for-dollar trade war with America. More recently, Trudeau's former deputy prime minister, who is now running to replace Trudeau, said in a televised debate that America is a predator, that once she becomes prime minister, she will invite European nations to have nuclear warheads stationed in Canada and pointed at the United States. It is tragic that the relationship between these two countries is being harmed by such baseless politics, and that our globalist leaders would foment a disagreement over tariffs into a proxy war fought on Canadian soil. Unless and until a Canadian leader steps up with real solutions to restore stability, reverse our nation's decline, and return the prosperity it once enjoyed, then perhaps Trump is right. Maybe the only way forward is to embrace a new vision, one that secures Canada's future, restores its sovereignty, and delivers what this country so desperately needs. It is time to make Canada great again. Trump has offered Canadians the deal of a lifetime, to join the U.S. and be welcomed as equals. Canadian business would have tariff-free access to the world's largest market. Individual Canadians would instantly be better off, replacing the weak Canadian dollar with the greenback, having lower taxes, decreased fuel costs, housing prices, better health care, better everything. President Trump has not made so generous an offer to anyone else. This is an exclusive. Instead of feeling honored and responding accordingly, many Canadians have reacted indignantly, Under the cumbersome Canadian Constitution, it is virtually impossible for Canada to join the U.S. in one fell swoop. But Trump can acquire Canada gradually and faster than anyone imagined by making deals with two key provinces instead. First, Trump could simultaneously invite the rich conservative province of Alberta and the poor liberal province of Newfoundland to join the U.S. The Supreme Court of Canada has already ruled that provinces can leave Canada via a clear referendum. The voters of these two provinces could quickly accept the dream deals that Trump is offering, especially since so many of them love Americans and have a long resented systematic exploitation by central Canada. Newfoundland and Labrador, with their vast resources and strategic Atlantic locations near Greenland, will become the fourth largest U.S. state after Alaska, California, and Texas. Recall that Newfoundland hosted 7,000 Americans on 9/11, when dozens of planes crossing the Atlantic were diverted there. During World War II, before Newfoundland joined Canada, it hosted American military bases, leading to post-war trade relations and close personal ties through thousands of marriages forged during wartime. Fear that Newfoundland would join an economic union with the U.S., which would have harmed Canadian fishing interests, led to an anti-American post-war campaign. Even then, it took two referenda and connivance by the UK and Canadian governments before Newfoundlanders reluctantly agreed to join Canada in 1949. Unlike liberal Newfoundland, which would be a poor blue state if it joined the U.S., Alberta has the world's fourth largest oil and gas reserves. It would be a rich red state. Alberta is so wealthy that it massively subsidizes the rest of Canada, but is also denigrated and resented by many Canadians because its riches are derived from dirty oil. Canada has for generations punished Alberta by blocking its ability to build energy pipelines and to develop its natural resources. Pressure today from central Canada upon Alberta to bear the brunt of retaliating against U.S. tariffs by stopping energy exports, the lifeblood of Albertans, has led to intense resentment and a revival of Alberta's already growing independence movement. So Alberta and Newfoundland are both primed for an exuberant offer from Trump, making them ready joiners. By simultaneously inviting a red and blue state into the Union, Trump would take a page from President Eisenhower's playbook. In 1959, Ike invited both Alaska and Hawaii to become states, thus eliminating political opposition by maintaining parity between Republican and Democrat senators. Once it became clear that Alberta is leaving Canada, opposition in the rest of Canada to joining the U.S. would quickly collapse. Quebec, whose separatists lost their 1995 referendum by just 1%, remains in Canada mainly because it is heavily subsidized by Alberta. Once that ends, Quebec will languish between becoming independent or taking Trump's deal. The remaining provinces would become geographically separated from one another and be subjected to Trump's tariffs. I predict that they would soon capitulate. All of this can be accomplished at warp speed. Alberta's decision to leave could be evident by Christmas. Come the 4th of July 2026, the 250th anniversary of Americans' Declaration of Independence, other provinces would realize the futility of making a go of it in a Canadian rump state. President Trump could then seal the deal and fulfill America's manifest destiny, the 2-century-long dream of America spanning the continent, from the Gulf of America in the south to the northern Arctic Ocean. President Donald J. Trump's enduring legacy would be the doubling of America's landmass and rendering the U.S. and Canada greater united than they ever were apart. And we close with a quotation from the Donald, which he tweeted out on January 6, 2025, stating, quote, "Many people in Canada love being the 51st state. The United States can no longer suffer the massive trade deficits and subsidies that Canada needs to stay afloat. Justin Trudeau knew this and resigned. If Canada merged with the U.S., there would be no tariffs, taxes would go way down, and they would be totally secure from the threat of the Russian and Chinese ships that are constantly surrounding them. Together, what a great nation it would be."